Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I am Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and assess how much the escalation trap Trump set for himself by starting this war is deepening, with his desperate attempt to end the war becoming an increasingly dangerous entanglement that could result in the use of a tactical nuclear weapon. Joining us is Robert Pape, a professor of political science and the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism at the University of Chicago, specializing in political violence and international security affairs. He is the author of Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, and Bombing to Win, Air Power and Coercion in War. He blogs at The Escalation Trap on Substack, where his latest article is The World's Economy Will Change Abruptly in the Next 10 Days, and he has an article at the New York Times where we will discuss The War is Turning Iran into a Major World Power. Then, with Trump depicting himself as Jesus in a post he has taken down, along with attacking Pope Leo while taking credit for an American pope being chosen because of Trump, we'll look into Trump's disrespect shown to Pope Leo and, by extension, Trump's insult to 1.4 billion Catholics. Joining us is James Carroll, the author of many books about religion, politics, and history. His memoir of the Vietnam War, An American Requiem, won the National Book Award. His history of the Pentagon, House of War, the Pentagon, and the Disastrous Rise of American Power, won the Penn Galbraith Award. And his history of Christian anti-Semitism, Constantine's Sword, the Church and the Jews, won the National Jewish Book Award. A former Catholic priest, he is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And before we begin, with Trump having bombed 7 countries and started a war against Iran, while at home his ICE thugs terrorize and break up families, murdering American citizens in the process, the need to rid the country of the deeply unpopular Trump kakistocracy and his clown car cabinet could not be more urgent. But these crooks and criminals would do anything to stay in power, as their billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media and the mob boss intimidates Republican politicians. Only people power can beat money power, and we need all hands on deck as we continue to do our part, delivering a daily public service, providing the facts and evidence to inform the majority of what they are up against and how to win back our country, our decency, and the respect of the community of nations. You can help save America's 250-year-old democracy by making a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org, and thank you. And joining us now is Robert Pape, a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. He's the author of Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism. He blogs at The Escalation Trap on Substack, where his latest article is The World's Economy Will Change Abruptly in the Next 10 Days. And he has an article at the New York Times, The War is Turning Iran into a Major World Power. Welcome to Background Briefing, Robert Pape.
Oh, thanks very much, Ian. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thanks, Robert. And we spoke earlier when this war began, and you predicted it absolutely accurately by suggesting that, it's a dumb strategy to rely on smart bombs. And now we are where we are after something like 13,000 targets have been struck in Iran by Israel and the United States, but nevertheless they were able to walk away from a negotiation in Pakistan over the weekend over the nuclear issue. So they're not bending or buckling, but now there's a naval blockade imposed by the United States Navy. So where do you think this is heading? Because it's a very combustible situation where...
You're right, Ian. We're now heading to an even more dangerous stage. And what you just described here with all the many thousands of targets that have been hit, we're now moving from week 6 to week 7. Air power alone has certainly been given its chance. So this isn't like, we tried for a day or two and then pulled back, and if we had just kept going. No, we are really seeing the limits of air power alone that we discussed, and it is now there not just as a failure and a strategic failure, but it's created a trap, Ian. It's created this escalation trap where we had the bombing. The bombings actually hit targets, killed leaders, The Iranians lash back with this horizontal escalation campaign, seize the Strait of Hormuz. This has given Iran tremendous new power that it can leverage for years and years and grow even stronger. And what that means is for us to walk away now is a strategic defeat, probably bigger than we've faced since Vietnam, and maybe even bigger than Vietnam, Ian. So it's because of what we have created here. It's a more dangerous regime, it's a more powerful regime, and it is poised to gain even more power in the future. And all this is because of those smart bombs and not taking seriously the limits that we described. Now, we're at a fork in the road. So the idea, and I know people desperately would like this just to be over, but that's not where we're at right now. We're at a fork in the road where either we accept that Iran is going to become, as I lay out in the New York Times, the fourth center of world power. They won't be as strong as the US. They won't be as strong as China. They won't be as strong as Russia, but they will be stronger than any other country on the planet with global influence. Either we accept that here and accept that they're likely going to have nuclear weapons in the next year. This is probably going to happen. Or we're going to have to escalate. And that escalation is the beginning, is already underway with the military and the naval blockade that we're talking about. But listening to J.D. Vance, this isn't just about a blockade, Ian. This escalation, as I've been saying now for many, many weeks on that Substack, Escalation Trap, this escalation is heading to a road of ground operations. And listening to J.D. Vance, there's little doubt in my mind that now he's on board, not just with the naval ops, but he's on board with the ground operations to go get that enriched uranium. And that has always been at the center of this. And I'm sorry to say, the off ramps, President Trump has had some. He hasn't taken them. Now we're deep into the escalation trap.
Well, Robert, it's even worse than that. I've heard from Pentagon sources that there's a plan to literally use a nuclear weapon, a ground burst on Esfahan, where the 60%, the 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium is supposed to be buried deep underground. The assumption is that that's the only real way to get it, and that sending in boots on the ground, you need to send in thousands and thousands of special forces operators over a long and vulnerable flight.
So, Ian, that is certainly not at all a surprise to me. After all, just a week ago, literally 6 days ago, President Trump threatened to end the entire civilization of Iran, which is essentially a nuclear threat to kill 92 million people in Iran. That's the entire population here. So the idea of using what will be called a tactical nuclear weapon to destroy Esfahan and the nuclear material. Here's the big problem, Ian. The big problem is we won't know if we got it. So we can do that, and we can say we got it, just like last June, you'll recall, President Trump said, I obliterated the entire program. And that doesn't mean that we actually did obliterate a program. The issue here, and this is why the bombing of Fordow was such a huge, huge mistake. And this is my modeling of this bombing for 20 years, always showed this would be the result, is you would destroy, the bombs would destroy their targets. That doesn't mean you would destroy the material and know whether you destroyed the material. And I want to underscore that word know you destroyed the material. I'm sorry, with nuclear material, it's just not good enough to hope you destroyed it. And once we use a nuclear weapon for the first time in anger since 1945, any country, we were the only ones to do it so far, and now we'll be the only one again doing it. This is a really huge danger here. This is a danger to every city in the United States. And it's not just a danger like, oh, they didn't nuke us back here in May and we're good. No. This is a huge, huge danger here for years. And even if we did destroy all the 60% enriched uranium, you are going to maximally incentivize 92 million Iranians to find a way to get more material to hit us back.
Well, crossing the nuclear threshold after Nagasaki, it's the last time a nuclear weapon was used in anger. That is so huge. And my great fear, Robert, is that that will give Putin permission to use a tactical nuke against Ukraine. He's often threatened to do that. And he is trapped, just as Trump is trapped in Iran, Putin is trapped in Ukraine. And he thinks that by using a nuke that would psychologically destroy the Ukrainians and that they would give up. So that would be, I think, the first consequence.
Ian, you're right to worry about the knock-on effects on President Xi in China, your President Putin. At some point, if this happens, we'll come in and we'll go through in depth those specific scenarios. But that just because that's one you mentioned doesn't mean it's even the most likely one next, because it could also incentivize Israel to be using tactical nuclear weapons when they see fit. So I think that we need to understand there's a wide set of sort of changing of permission structures to use tactical nuclear weapons once we do it and set this precedent for this purpose. And it's not just going to be limited to the people we think of as our enemies. It's going to expand, and that's going to be a very, very dangerous world. The point I'm making is it's also going to expand in another way, which is unless we occupy all 92 million Iranians, how do we know 3 years from now? I don't mean 3 days from now. 3 years after we drop a tactical nuclear weapon anywhere in Iran, how do we know they're not actually building the material to strike us back and get the retaliation? They don't need to retaliate within some short period of time and then, oh, emotions cool, they'll get over it. You're really playing with fire here for an entire generation, Ian.
So, Robert Pape, let's talk about your article at the New York Times, "The War is
Yeah.
Turning Iran into a Major World Power,"
Yeah.
in which you say the United States faces a difficult choice: either commit to a long-term effort to reassert control over the Straits of Hormuz or accept a new global energy arrangement in which the United States control is no longer assured. If it chooses acceptance, the outcome is clear. The international system will reorganize with Iran as the fourth center of global power. Now, I might add that already there's been enormous consequences, not just for Asia, not just for China, but for example, Australia, it will run out of jet fuel in a week because they were depending upon exports from China of jet fuel. But now China has pulled back on exporting all of its refined products. So all around the world, you're seeing the consequences of this.
Ian, that's exactly right. And that's why I followed up late last night. So I actually went to London to do some quick podcasts and so forth. So I had 12 hours on the plane and 15 hours in the airport to do nothing but work on this. So I have been working on economic blockades, economic sanctions for 30 years. In my book, Bombing to Win, it may seem, well, it's only about air power. Oh, no, no, no. It deals with the naval blockades of Japan and so forth. Much more comprehensive than people might think here. And so I know quite a bit about the, not just like the historic details, but the frameworks. And that's what I offer to people, Ian. And what the key thing they need to know is that whether you look at Japan in 45 or 44, 45, or the 1973 OPEC crisis, there's a standard pattern when it comes to economic cutoffs, economic blockade, which is in the first 45 days or so, and we're now at day 45 since the war started and the blockade started over the Hormuz. What you get is price rises and disruptions here as the first stage. Then next stage is actual shortage. And that's what you just quoted. You're starting to see, and I lay out more of this, you're starting to see actual shortages, and those will materialize for real abruptly, like going off a cliff, over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Say by day 60, there will be a big change. And that is because you literally can't replace 20% of the world's oil, all the gas that comes out of the Persian Gulf, and all the other stuff that comes out of the Persian Gulf. We just don't have a spare 20 or 30% of all that floating around anymore. So this is what creates true shortage, not just simply price hike. And then once you have that, and this will start to kick in by day 90, that is the stage 3, is now you have actual economic contraction, because there will be those shortages will lead to actual decline of productive activity, products, commodities. They will start to not be there. And that's what we have to look forward to here is where you could call this like we've been approaching a cliff. We're about to start going over a cliff, and it's going to be a series of big cliffs over the next 45 days. And we're going to start to feel this, and we will feel it in America as well. Not quite as severely, but what does not quite as severely mean? It's only somewhere between the 1970s and the 1930s in America, while everybody else is closer to the 1930s. That's what we're talking about. This is that severe of a problem.
Well, but it's already begun, the blockade, at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, and we don't know at what point there'll be a clash between the United States Navy and these tiny little boats that the Iranians have. We don't even know how many mines that they've dropped already. And if it escalates, which it's likely to do, then Iran clearly has indicated what it plans to do. Just recently, it fired, in fact, during the ceasefire, in spite of the ceasefire on the first or second day, they fired, actually it was on the first day, they fired a whole salvo of drones at the Saudi pumping station that pumps oil across a pipeline that goes across Saudi Arabia into the Red Sea, which is an alternative to the Straits of Hormuz. So you know what their strategy will be, just literally to destroy all of the Gulf states' abilities to send oil. Now we're also learning that there are all kinds of plans afoot now to build pipelines to get around the Straits of Hormuz. None of those, of course, are going to happen for years. You could possibly build a pipeline across Oman into the Indian Ocean. But the long and the short of it is that, again, it gets back to what you were telling us at the beginning of this war about the trap we're in. Escalation will lead to what you could describe on the Iranian side as the Samson option, which is to tear the whole temple down, right?
That's exactly, you're getting it quite right, Ian. And what you're seeing is a widening set of target possibilities for Iran. So if we have kept for our naval ships, just so the listeners know, we've had carriers, for example, and we've had destroyers. We've kept them about 1,000 miles away from the Strait of Hormuz, specifically so they would not be targeted. Now, the point here of putting them in the straits here and actually stopping the exports right at the port, which is what is in the papers today, would mean that you could not just stop Iranian exports, but you could allow, say, Saudi, and you could allow the others. So what this means is the Iranians have a wide range of potential targets. You're naming the targets on land, the production facilities on land in the Persian Gulf. They also could continue to only selectively target the tankers themselves, because if you just blow up again, so the Navy's escorting them, but if you blow up the tanker, then what good is the escort? And then, of course, you have the escort themselves, the destroyers, the ships themselves. So you end up with a wider range of targets that we have to protect. So they only, the saying is the bad guys only have to be right once. We have to be right 100%. Well, we're widening the targets we have to protect 100%. And the bad guys still only have to knock out a few to be very, very, very effective. And it'll be worse than the worst weeks in Vietnam is what we're heading for here. So Vietnam, all 58,000 Americans did not die in a day in Vietnam. That's over a 10-year period. And we just had bad weeks in Vietnam. And what we're heading for are some Vietnam bad weeks.
Well, these tankers, Robert, are floating bombs. The gas ones are, they're a tactical nuclear weapon in terms of their yield. explosive yield. It's really frightening, that
Well,
prospect.
it's like when someone attacks an airliner here, they're extremely fragile and they're carrying all these thousands of pounds of fuel. So you only need a little bit of sparks here because the planes themselves do the rest of the work. Well, that's what you're seeing with these tankers. They are not built to defend themselves. They're not built to tanks to go into battle. They're built to, as cheaply as possible, carry as much fuel, which is highly explosive and flammable, as possible. And so that's what you are seeing, which makes it easier for a relatively cheap drone, $20,000 drone, to do a surprising amount of damage. So the exchange ratio here for Iran continues to be in its favor. And all this is to say the tactics, we will discuss these tactical issues, but there's no sense, there's no way in which what has happened in the last week is taking options for Iran off the table. Iran's getting more options on the table, and at the same time, the long war strategy, America's essentially bought into Iran's long war strategy. So the whole idea here for Iran was to turn this into a long war of attrition and make it not just about the battlefield, the military battlefields in the Persian Gulf, but the global economic battlefield. Well, that's happening. This is what I was saying the first week on the Substacks and discussing with you. So this is literally Iran's best favorable position, and over the coming months and months here, this is going to work to their favor. And even if we imagine somehow by say September that somehow magically we will have finally crushed the Iranian regime. By September, we'll have way blown past all the dates and timelines of the 1973 OPEC oil embargo. And so here we will have been 6 months into this, and now what we're facing is years of economic wreckage. This is a hugely expensive, even if we have a victory, it will turn out to be a hugely expensive victory. And I'm not betting that that victory is ever coming.
But there's no clarity on exactly what Trump has said in his long, rambling Truth Social post yesterday. He said that any country that accepts Iran's toll booth on the Straits of Hormuz and pays the toll will be intercepted by the US Navy, and they will not be able to get to the high seas. Now, my understanding is that the Chinese ships are going through without a toll.
That's right. That's right. So it's confusing in multiple levels here, Ian. So first of all, who's paying the tolls? India, for example, is paying tolls. And I know because I've been on India television almost every day. I mean, a lot.
Right. And
they're always.
by the way, they're paying in yuan. They're not in dollars.
Oh, that's right. That's right. But that is so what you end up with here is instead of the United States should be geopolitically wanting to ally with India to help counterbalance China. Now, what's happening is we're militarily threatening India, essentially. And that is not going to work to our advantage. And then, as you just pointed out, well, so we're going to threaten India, but not China. How's that going to work? So what you are seeing is the details of how this is evolving. They just continue, whether it's through confusion or asymmetries, to just keep working more and more in Iran's advantage. And they're not working, they're working against America's advantage, which is why we didn't do this on week one. If this was such a great idea, we would have done this before. And what you're seeing is Donald Trump is desperate to get anything he can call a strategic victory to get out of the escalation trap. He's in the trap, you see, but he's not able to get it because what he keeps facing every time he escalates is another round of defeats. So then that is going to encourage another escalation, and that's going to lead. And so that's how the trap works. You're going up the rungs to try to find a level of escalation where you get to declare victory, but you're not getting it, so you have to keep doing it. And that's how we got to a 10-year war in Vietnam. I mean, this just went on and on and on in Vietnam. And here the difference is not it's not just time, but the difference is the global economy. Here, 10 years of this in the global economy, and could you even imagine that? We can't even imagine that. And then what else? What else? It's the uranium, the enriched uranium. As this goes on, we are nowhere closer to getting a single ounce of that enriched uranium. And maybe we are, that it is all in Esfahan. We just have no idea. And we don't know what they've been able to do in small ways since last June. All we know is what we know. And that leaves an enormous Swiss cheese block of knowledge for us. We have giant holes in what we know, which is why you always, with WMD, go in on the ground. That's the way the inspectors do it, and that's the way we did it in Iraq, and that's the way you would have to do it here.
But we don't know whether China is going to be able to export oil. And we do know that Japan and South Korea, our allies, are going to be hurt very badly along the Philippines, which is already in a crisis. Now, as this thing escalates, which I think it's likely to do, the only way that the U.S. can stop Iran exporting oil is to target Hog Island, which they have done, but they haven't targeted the oil facilities. At the point that that happens, Robert, it's obvious that that's when you have the Samson option on the part of the Iranians, that they will just destroy Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia's oil facilities and gas facilities.
The oil facilities, and if the real Samson option here, Ian, which I'm not saying they will do, certainly not willy-nilly, are the desalination plants. See, and any of your listeners can go and just Google desalination plants in the Persian Gulf, and you'll see these are giant facilities above ground, easily geolocated. I am sure that they have the Iranians, whether it's themselves or the Russians or Chinese, have all the coordinates for these. And these 70% of the drinkable water goes through these. In some countries like Kuwait, it's 95% of their drinkable water goes through the desalination plants. And you can't store, again, this is about storage. You can store water for a few weeks, but you destroy those desalination plants, and within a month, who's bringing in that water for tens of millions of people? And there's not going to be enough airlift capacity. You can't go in through the sea, because of the drones and the mines. So this whole issue here, the humanitarian dimension, we are getting deeper and deeper into the escalation trap, and the costs are unfortunately going to go up. And what you saw is that President Trump is just not willing to make any concessions. The concessions are real because he has to accept a strategic defeat. He is turning into, Ian, and I'm sure he doesn't intend to, but he's becoming the modern equivalent of Lyndon Johnson, where he's just going up the rung of escalation. You're seeing Pete Hegseth, the modern equivalent of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, and they're just going up the rung of escalation here, looking for that rung which will get victory. But at each stage, they're not, and the costs are going up. The costs look a little different than in Vietnam, but they are tremendous. And the costs on the world economy, oh my goodness gracious, you think you've heard screaming so far. I don't think we've heard anything like the screaming we're going to hear by the end of May.
So just in the last few minutes then, Robert, let me address something that concerns me again. We talked about the use of a tactical nuclear weapon.
Yeah,
I can't on Esfahan now. It would seem to me that the Iranians would have to move those canisters of 440 kilograms of U2 of ACU at 60%. First of all, you can't store them close together at any rate because of the criticality accident is possible. So you've got to disperse them at any rate. And I'm just assuming that they're smart enough to get them out of there because it doesn't take much to go from 60% to bomb grade, 90%. That can happen in a week or two if you've got enough centrifuges, which I believe the Iranians have. So they will go nuclear. The father they killed on the first day had a fatwa against nuclear weapons on religious grounds. The son, who was badly wounded and apparently deeply disfigured, I don't think he's going to stick by the father's fatwa. And I think the first thing that the Iranians will do is go as fast as they can to a nuclear weapon. So that's...
Let me explain the details, Ian, that your listeners may not know, and why it is more than plausible that even if when we use the TAC nuke to destroy Esfahan, and even if all that material is there, a year from now, they'll have a nuclear weapon. And here's the facts. It takes 1,000 centrifuges, and Iran has had nearly 20,000 centrifuges, and it was producing hundreds and hundreds a month. It takes 1,000 centrifuges 1 year to start from ore that comes out of the ground and produce the material, the uranium-235, enough of the quantity for a working bomb. 1,000 for 1 year for one bomb, and they have all the ore, they have all the materials for the centrifuges, and they would do it not as one giant facility. You need to do these in cascades. The cascades are usually 164, so you would just basically have material that would go through, and you could even separate and decentralize this in these deeply buried areas where we can't get at their missiles and their drones, etc. And we would never know that's happening or not. And even if it's not happening today, they could start that tomorrow. They could start it immediately after the tactical nuclear weapon goes off. And so you could say, okay, well, then we'll have to nuke more. We'll have to nuke all the areas here. Well, all those areas that we talk about, Yagin, where the uranium ore mine is, Natanz, Fordow, Esfahan here, they're all within roughly 150-mile radius of each other in the center of Iran, which means you are going to create one, if you're going to use, let's say, a dozen tactical nuclear weapons, or 5, it doesn't, the number is not the point, it's the dispersal of them. You are going to create enormous radiation clouds that are going to go through that country. And this is going to be a disaster of humanitarian proportions that we just cannot even yet fathom right now. And on top of that, you again will have incentivized the remaining living people in Iran to produce working nuclear weapons, and not just to have them as deterrents, but payback. They're going to want some payback. And that is, they're not going to care that Donald Trump may not be here because he's so old, he won't be here in a few years. And after he's gone, everybody will calm down. No, they're going to be mad at America for this. And this is not a world Americans have ever imagined. And let me just throw in one more thing, if that's okay, Ian, which is no one's talking about biological and chemical nerve gas agents. Iran was one of the leaders in this. And Iran, in order to do that, you need to have fertilizer facilities, soap facilities. These are dual use facilities. And again, you don't need large quantities. You need dispersal, and you need people willing to die to carry that out. Well, you use nuclear weapons here, either one or the dozens I'm describing here, you are going to incentivize massive numbers of people to be willing to die to carry out that payback, which could even be not of a nuclear nature.
Well, just in closing, if 20% of the oil...
Yeah, but you decided to go back to this.
No, but I just wanted to finish up one last point, and that is that if 20% of the oil is taken off the market by the blockage of the Straits of Hormuz and the scenarios we've talked about, where it could be shut down for years, that would then leave Russia, which has 11% of the world's oil market, and the United States, which has an even more percentage, as the last man standing in terms of oil production. And the oil, of course, would be $10, $20 a gallon by then. We know that Trump has some peculiar relationship with Putin, and one of the former heads of directors of national intelligence referred to Putin as Trump's case officer. What's the possibility there of Russia and the United States being the last men standing in terms of oil production?
Well, Putin will certainly take advantage of this. I don't know how much he's going to really do anything more to work with Trump because Trump's willing to give Putin so much without Putin doing anything for him. So I think that Putin will just be able to take big advantage of this, and I suspect Putin and Russia will enjoy watching Europe itself crushed here. So the first thing Putin is going to want to do is crush Europe here. And so this is probably, and maybe, you see how J.D. Vance and company have treated Western Europe lately. So I don't think Western Europe's going to be looking so happy. But another thing I just want to point out, Ian, as the prices go up, President Trump is still the president. What that means, and the Republicans still control both houses of Congress. What that means is they can start to do things to asymmetrically impose the costs on blue America versus red America. And we haven't seen that yet. And people say, oh, they would never do that. Well, they just had the war on universities with essentially red America against blue America. So we just had Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago. We just had Metro Blitz in Minneapolis. So I think we need to understand that as these costs go up, it's not like, oh, we're all going to be in this together. Yeah, really? Is that exactly how this is going to happen? I think we need to understand there are some other alternatives, which is the governments can redistribute winners and losers. And there'll still be some hurt. I don't mean to say red states will not feel any pain whatsoever, but there's question of relative hurt. And this is, I think, as we get into the fall, there's going to be a big question here. How does Donald Trump rescue his prospects here? And one of the ways he might decide to do it is to give big benefits or bigger benefits to the red and take them from the blue, as he's done since day one of taking office. And that has not started to happen yet. Here. But this is what happens when states have shortages. I've, again, studied this for 30 years, lectured on this for 30 years, published about this in 30 years. It's not just rationing where everybody sacrifices the same amount. Sometimes that happens, like in World War II for America. More common, it's the government decides to give benefits to its loyal population, and take from its opponents.
Well, Robert Pape, I thank you very much for joining us here today. I really appreciate it. It's
always a pleasure, Ian. I can't wait when we come back in and we have a better conversation.
I pray that is the case. And again, I've been speaking with Robert Pape, who's a professor of political science and the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism at the University of Chicago, specializing in political violence and international security affairs. He's the author of Dying to Win, The Strategic Logic of Suicide Terrorism, and Bombing to Win, Air Power and Coercion in War. And he blogs at the Escalation Trap on Substack, where his latest article is The World's Economy Will Change Abruptly in the Next 10 Days. And he has an article at the New York Times, The War is Turning Iran into a Major World Power. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back looking into how Trump depicted himself as Jesus in a post he has since taken down, along with attacking Pope Leo, while taking credit for an American Pope being chosen because of Trump.
I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. In my
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is James Carroll, the author of many books about religion, politics, and history. His memoir of the Vietnam War, An American Requiem, won the National Book Award. His history of the Pentagon, House of War, the Pentagon and the Disastrous Rise of American Power, won the Penn Galbraith Award. And his history of Christian anti-Semitism, Constantine's Sword, the Church and the Jews, won the National Jewish Book Award. A former Catholic priest, he is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Welcome to Background Briefing, James Carroll.
Thank you, Ian. Good to talk with you again.
Well, thanks for joining us, James. And there's like a double whammy, like a double-barrel shotgun blast coming from Donald Trump. He posted on Sunday a picture of himself, AI-generated picture of himself, posing as Jesus Christ, administering to a sick person with fireworks, Statue of Liberty, fighter jets in the background, and then went on this tear against Pope Leo. It's like a gratuitous swipe at the head of the Catholic Church, and by extension, 1.4 billion people. Now, I know that the guy's losing his mind, but nevertheless, how do you account for this? Is this, even Protestant supporters of his are having qualms about it. Without getting into diagnostic mode, what is your opinion of this craziness, James?
Well, I appreciate the conversation with you, Ian. Although I have to admit, if words have ever failed me, I think they're going to fail me now. I'm absolutely astounded by the way in which President Trump has moved beyond every boundary of what can be understood as normal human behavior. I'm not interested in diagnosis either, but I do think my own sense is that the man is at the mercy of tremendously self-destructive impulses. There is no way that he could, in any rational mode at least, both at this in the same moment insult the Pope, and in the same moment presume to publish an image of himself as Jesus Christ in the act of healing someone. It's guaranteed to work against him in every way. Let me just say, I welcome Pope Leo's frank and direct criticism of the language and the strategies that Donald Trump and his administration have been pursuing over the last several weeks. The language is grotesque. It's outrageous that Hegseth and others in the administration invoke the name of God to justify the cruel, inhuman, unjust violence they've launched. But it's also an astonishment that when Pope Leo responds to that language with sharp, critical words, but respectful words, not in any way ad hominem, that what is hurled back at him are these deeply insulting characterizations of Pope Leo. One remembers, wasn't it Joseph Stalin who asked, how many divisions has the Pope? I'm afraid that Donald Trump is soon to find out that the Pope has a lot more divisions than he could imagine.
Well, I think the point that you're making is that essentially this is not about a disagreement in the way that Pope Leo has dealt with Trump. What Trump has done is not disagreement, it's disrespect. And
yes,
that is truly insulting, particularly to devout people. Obviously, it all started with some of the remarks that the Pope has made about this dreadful, misbegotten war that Trump has inflicted on the people of the Middle East and the world, where he criticized delusions of omnipotence fueling the Iran war and other conflicts around the world. And of course, you mentioned Hegseth. Hegseth led a prayer group at the Pentagon recently where he prayed saying, "Let every round find its mark." So
yeah,
this is truly disgusting. But I think Trump's in a bubble of delusion, and it's not helped by the fact that the faith person that he has in the White House likened him to Jesus Christ. And of course, she's just the most, outrageous hustler, grifter. She just makes money hand over fist in the name of Jesus. So I'm not excusing him, but I'm saying I think he's in a bubble where maybe he is starting to believe what Paula White is saying about him.
Well, it's very curious, isn't it, that the image that President Trump chose to post of himself as Jesus is an image of Jesus in the act of healing someone who's sick, which is an image of pure mercy, pure compassion, pure empathy, characteristics that Donald Trump has absolutely no acquaintance of. Trump is cruel in every way that Jesus is merciful. So there's even a lack of self-knowledge in the image he chooses to use as a kind of post of himself as Jesus Christ. Let me just observe, Ian, I salute you for daring to take on this subject. I say daring because we're all drowning in punditry and in commentary as the world is desperately in search of language in which to express the terrible experience we human beings are having at the mercy of this powerful man. And yet we have to keep doing this, Ian. That's why I salute you. We have to keep talking about it, even though, as I hear myself saying the most obvious things that can be said about Trump, his madness, his cruelty, even so, we have to be holding up a standard of decency. And every time President Trump affronts it, it needs to be said that yet again he is affronted decency. Otherwise, you know what will happen? We'll forget what decency looks like.
No.
And one of the beauties of the Christian tradition of remembering Jesus is because Jesus himself is remembered as embodying basic human decency. That's what makes Jesus unforgettable. Now, his memory can be twisted, as we know. It can be twisted into making him an avatar of war, and that's exactly what Pete Hegseth has done. And as you know, Pete Hegseth is obsessed with the Crusades, and his fetish, his Crusader fetish has him bearing tattoos from the Crusades. It's unbelievable, actually. But even that we have to take as an opportunity to think and respond, because what, of course, Hegseth doesn't understand is that the Crusades, a series of holy wars that went on for almost 300 years, ended in grotesque failure. Their ongoing and permanent purpose was to reconquer the Holy Land from the Islamic infidel. Well, that failed. The Muslims maintained control over the so-called Holy Lands until the 20th century. It's an astonishment how ignorant Hegseth's appeal to the Crusades as a point of inspiration is. But it's also quite dangerous because in the history of the West, the Crusades gave us Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, misogyny, white racism, intolerance, theocracy, everything that liberal democracy is desperately trying to leave behind. And of course, now what we find is that our own very liberal democracy is threatened by the power being exercised by the government of the United States. It's a true point of deep existential, political, and I would say spiritual crisis for all of us. But we have to keep talking about it. So thank you, Ian, for making it part of your preoccupation.
Well, I don't want to think I'm preoccupied with Trump, but he is the president, and he's a curse on humanity and on the planet, and he's also dangerously deluded. In our first segment on today's program, I was talking to Robert Pape, who's very knowledgeable about war and strategy, etc., and he thinks that the possibility of a nuclear weapon being used against Iran is certainly on the table. So we are in a terrible situation. And when you talk about liberal, I mean, first of all, Trump lost his political mentor, the illiberal leader of Hungary, to a landslide against him, in spite of the efforts on the part of Vice President Vance, who claims to be a Catholic, although he was introduced into the Catholic Church by a far-right Catholic bishop, but hasn't really gone through the requisite steps. And on his new book, he has this picture of a church in a bucolic valley. And, of course, the church turns out to be a United Methodist church. So he's not exactly getting off on the right foot here. But Trump, in his attacking Pope Leo, said he is a very liberal person,
Yeah.
as though that's a death sentence. You know,
Yeah.
he started out by saying, "I'm not a fan of Pope Leo. Pope
Yeah.
Leo is weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy." Well, my God,
Yeah.
who is really disastrous in terms of foreign
Yeah.
policy and has led us into a war that could end up in a cataclysm and with the Middle East on fire. So.
Yeah.
But then he really gets into what he's really about, which is everything's about himself. I mean, what he cannot steal, he destroys. And it always comes back to himself. And he went on to say that I don't want a pope who criticizes the United States because I'm doing exactly what I was elected for in a landslide, in caps. And then he went on to say that because he was an American, that Leo only got the post because he was an American. And they thought he would be the best way to deal with President Donald J. Trump. If I wasn't in the White House, Leo wouldn't be in the Vatican. I mean, my God, it's unbelievable.
Well, the real world has a way of correcting our fantasies, doesn't it? And Trump is at the mercy of his fantasies. But the real world is pressing in on him now, big time. And we're actually watching the fantasies and delusions of this man, one by one, get destroyed. The war in Iran is the most important pressing of the real world against his fantasies. Supremely dangerous, of course. But what can we do? We can step back from this present critical moment and hope that it is the beginning of the turning point in which Trump and his circle are brought up short by the realities of what they're trying to ignore. The way in which the brave people of Minnesota and Minneapolis brought him and his circle up short with the reality of the decency of the citizens of Minneapolis. And of course, he wants that to be the forgotten moment instead of a turning point moment. But it was a turning point moment. And perhaps we're on the threshold of another one. The Pope has spoken with authentic integrity, and the world is going to hear that much more clearly than the diluted nonsense that comes from President Trump. So I think there's a good reason to be expecting another turning point, that this dark moment in American life and in the life of the human species because of it can turn toward the light. That's my hope. I'm, as you know, a Catholic, a critical Catholic, but I'm very grateful to Pope Leo for the stand he's taken and the calm, reasoned and decent way he's doing it.
Well, he's on a trip, 11-day trip to Africa at the moment, starting on Monday. He's in Algeria, and he did say today in Algeria that he denounced neo-colonial world powers who are violating international law without specifically referring to the United States. But criticism is right on target.
It's true. It's true. And I expect that we'll hear other bracing messages from His Holiness in Africa.
Well, prior to that, he said that God, quote, does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but rejects them. He went on to say that even though you may make many prayers, I will not listen. Well, now, then he goes on to quote the Old Testament passage from Isaiah, that, quote, even though you may make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. And that kind of reminds me of the Reverend Paula White. You know, she makes many prayers in order to raise money for herself and say that Trump is just like Jesus, if not the reincarnation of Jesus. So this is, do you think that, well, how seriously do you think the objections coming from the Protestants, which are a big part of his base, particularly the evangelical base, that is pretty significant, isn't it? I've always talked about or searched for a religious left in this country, because there used to be a religious left. I mean, slavery was ended in this country by the religious left. Williams Jennings Bryan ran at the end of the 19th century on a platform, and he had the backing of a religious left, where both urban poor and the rural poor were all basically part of the religious left. But the Republicans have very cleverly created the religious right, and they worship a God that one of the the intellectual spark of the American Revolution, Thomas Paine, once said that belief in a cruel God makes a cruel man. And boy, we've got a lot of cruel men in power.
It's true. You've just given a thumbnail sketch of our current moment, and there is a way in which evangelical, fundamentalist, white supremacist, nationalist Christianity is reflected in the halls of power in this country, embodied most significantly by Hegseth. But the problem is, it's a deep problem, because we human beings are at the mercy of forces and turns in history that are unprecedented, and we don't know quite how to make sense of what we're faced with. And so some people fall back on irrational, superstitious, self-justifying religious piety. It's happened before. And this white racist nationalism and wrapping itself in the memory of Jesus Christ is a supreme danger right now. But it's making an alliance with a highly intellectual, reactionary Roman Catholicism at the same time. That's represented by Vance. It's very curious. We have in this evangelical fundamentalist Hegseth and this reactionary Opus Dei friendly Vance Catholic, we have the sort of the two prongs, a weapon that's pointed right at the heart of democratic traditions in the United States. That's another reason, in my view, to be grateful for the arrival of Pope Leo. From all that we know, a man who has spent so much of his own time working among the impoverished, he's not at the mercy of these reactionary religious impulses. They're quite dangerous. And the MAGA movement is the point of the spear here. And it is giving evangelical Christianity a bad name. We should remember that the most powerful manifestation of political hope in my lifetime, maybe you're old enough to say this too, Ian, was an evangelical Christian by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The civil rights movement, led by the Black church, was an evangelical Christian movement. And it's a good thing to remember as we are confronted by these cruel, self-justifying, racist, misogynist, male supremacist, white supremacist, religious people wrapping themselves in the memory of Jesus, but they're really disgracing, they're defiling the memory of Jesus in the way they do it. Hegseth, Exhibit A. Trump, of course, a pure nihilist, has no religious impulse of his own, but he's exploiting these religious impulses of other people, many other people.
Well, James Carroll, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Ian, it's always a pleasure. Once again, I thank you for keeping the faith. I mean, the faith as you define it, which is to tell the truth, even if it's a difficult day to do that, which it is today.
Well, thank you, James. And again, I've been speaking with James Carroll, who's the author of many books about religion, politics, and history. His memoir, The Vietnam War, An American Requiem, won the National Book Award. His history of the Pentagon, House of War, the Pentagon and the Disastrous Rise of American Power, won the Penn Galbraith Award. And his history of Christian anti-Semitism, Constantine's Sword, the Church and the Jews, won the National Jewish Book Award. A former Catholic priest, he is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon and Asher Price. And if you've missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can visit us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we'll include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easy for you to sign up for the daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. And you can find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media managers, Evan and Luke Susswood, are also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and assure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.